The serpent coiled around the infant's throat wasn't what killed her. It was the ritual blade her own mother wielded under the Louisiana moon. For over 230 years, a bloodline cult has thrived in America's swamplands, their ancient pact demanding unspeakable sacrifices. Tonight, we expose the Coluver Parish horror that authorities refuse to investigate. What you're about to witness will challenge everything you believe about religious freedom's limits. If this investigation sent chills down your spine, subscribe to Mystery Diary for more bone-chilling documentaries that uncover the darkness hiding in plain sight. Drop a comment below telling us which corner of Earth you're watching from. Let's see how far our community of truth seekers spans across the globe. What you are about to witness is a dramatization. While inspired by documented patterns of religious extremism in America's isolated communities, the events, locations, and individuals depicted in this documentary are fictional. The Coluver Parish, its inhabitants, and their alleged practices exist only within this narrative framework. We present this story not as fact, but as a cautionary exploration of how isolation, tradition, and unchecked power can create conditions for unimaginable horror. Louisiana's swamplands have long captured the human imagination. These primordial wetlands, where civilization meets wilderness, where solid ground gives way to murky depths, have birthed countless legends. Spanish moss drapes from ancient cypresses like funeral shrouds. Alligators glide through black water with prehistoric patience. And in the spaces between what we know and what we fear, stories take root and flourish like the invasive kudzu that chokes the life from native trees. It is here, in this liminal space between truth and legend, that we place our tale of the serpent's bloodline, a fictional cult whose supposed history spans from the late 18th century to our present day. This story asks uncomfortable questions. How do dangerous ideologies persist across generations? What allows extremism to flourish in democracy's shadows? When does religious freedom become a shield for horror? As we journey through 2 centuries of fabricated archives, invented testimonies, and imagined investigations, remember that while these specific events never occurred, they echo real tragedies that have unfolded when communities close ranks against outside scrutiny. The Coluver Parish may be fiction, but the human capacity for both devotion and depravity is all too real. We invite you to experience this narrative as both entertainment and warning, a reminder that the most dangerous predators often wear familiar faces and speak in comforting tongues. In the spring of 1794, 17 families departed New Orleans under cover of darkness. Led by the charismatic preacher Matthias Serpentine, a name that would prove grimly prophetic, these wealthy merchants, plantation owners, and their servants abandoned their comfortable lives for the untamed swamplands 60 miles northwest of the city. The official parish records, meticulously maintained by the Catholic diocese, note only that these families sought spiritual purification through isolation and communion with God's untouched creation. What the records don't explain is why some of New Orleans' most prosperous citizens would trade their elegant townhouses for rough-hewn cabins built on stilts above treacherous waters. Contemporary letters from confused business partners speak of sudden liquidations, broken contracts, and cryptic farewell notes mentioning an ancient calling that cannot be ignored. Marie Claire Thibodeau, wife of prominent sugar merchant Jean-Baptiste Thibodeau, wrote to her sister, "My husband speaks now only in riddles and scripture I do not recognize. He says we go to prepare the way. For what, he will not say." The settlement they established, Coluver Parish, named for the French word for snake, presented itself as a model of Christian devotion. Their first structure was a church, built with imported limestone at enormous expense. Visiting priests reported a congregation of unusual fervor, noting how the settlers gathered for prayer not just on Sundays but every evening as darkness fell. Their dedication borders on the ecstatic, wrote Father Miguel Coronado in 1796. Though I confess their interpretations of Scripture often perplex me. It was Father Coronado who first documented the peculiar decorations adorning the church's interior. Mixed among traditional Christian iconography were recurring serpentine motifs, not the serpent of Eden depicted as evil, but serpents crowned with light, serpents swallowing their own tails, serpents with disturbingly human eyes. When questioned, Matthias Serpentine explained these represented the eternal cycle of death and rebirth, the wisdom of transformation that our Lord himself embodied. The explanation satisfied few, but the community's generous tithes silenced most criticism. By 1799, Coluver Parish had grown to nearly 200 souls. Ships arrived monthly with supplies, though their manifests showed curious items. Massive quantities of salt, exotic herbs, and live animals far exceeding what a community that size could consume. The settlement's children, visitors noted, were uncommonly quiet and obedient, with an unsettling tendency to move in synchronized groups. When a traveling merchant asked young Isabel Thibodeau what games the children played, she replied simply, "We practice for the becoming." The last official inspection of Coluver Parish occurred in December 1799. The inspector's report, filed in the territorial archives, describes a thriving religious community with no apparent irregularities. His personal journal, discovered decades later, tells a different story. There is something deeply wrong in that place. The very air tastes of secrets. I will not return. The yellow fever epidemic of 1832 ravaged Louisiana with particular cruelty. In New Orleans alone, 5,000 souls perished in the span of 3 months. Yet in Coluver Parish, something far stranger than disease stalked the community's children. Between August and October of that year, 23 children vanished, not claimed by fever, but simply gone, as if swallowed by the swamp itself. The official parish records, maintained by the aging Matthias Serpentine's son, Josiah, attributed these losses to the epidemic. The fever took them swiftly, he wrote in the community ledger. Their small bodies could not withstand the pestilence. We committed them to God's embrace in the old way, as is our custom. But no graves were marked, no funeral services recorded, and most tellingly, none of these children had shown symptoms of yellow fever before their disappearances. The truth might have remained buried in the bayou mud if not for the journal of Ezekiel Marsh, a plantation overseer who fled Coluver Parish in November 1832. His water-damaged journal, discovered in an estate sale in 1923, contains entries that transform tragedy into horror. September 3rd, another child taken in the night. The Beauregard boy, aged 7. His mother's screams echoed across the water until dawn. Serpentine says it is God's will that the children go to serve a higher purpose. The others nod and weep in silence. September 19th, I have seen what they do beneath the church. The chamber stretches deep into the earth, lit by torches that burn with greenish flame. They speak of feeding the scaled father, of honoring the ancient pact. I dare not write more. If they knew I had witnessed. October 2nd, the new moon approaches. They prepare for another offering. The children chosen seem to know their fate. They walk willingly, as if in a trance. Little Sarah Thibodeau told her mother she was going to become eternal. The mother smiled through her tears. These people are mad, all of them mad. What makes Marsh's account particularly disturbing is his notation of dates. Each disappearance coincided precisely with the new moon, a detail that would have been meaningless to most 19th-century observers but suggests ritualistic timing. His final entry, dated October 31st, 1832, consists of a single line, "I leave tonight or join the children in whatever hell awaits below." The pattern Marsh documented, children vanishing during new moon phases, community acceptance disguised as religious fervor, and references to something ancient beneath the church, would repeat throughout Coluver Parish's history. But in 1832, as yellow fever provided convenient cover for the unthinkable, 23 children entered the swamp's embrace and never returned. Their names appear in no cemetery records, their fates officially attributed to disease. Yet sometimes, on moonless nights, locals claim you can still hear children singing in the swamps around where Coluver Parish once stood. Young voices raised in hymns that no Christian church ever taught. The meticulous record-keeping of Coluver Parish presents a disturbing paradox. Birth certificates, baptismal records, and marriage licenses were maintained with obsessive precision, documenting every new soul entering the community. Yet death records remain conspicuously incomplete, particularly surrounding 3 major incidents that claimed dozens of lives across 150 years. Each tragedy, examined in isolation, appears explicable. Viewed together, they form a pattern as clear as serpent tracks in mud. The first incident occurred during America's centennial year. On July 4, 1876, as the nation celebrated its 100th birthday, Coluver Parish held its own festivities. By dawn of July 5, 19 adults were dead. The territorial coroner, Dr. Alphonse Moreau, attributed the deaths to mass hysteria induced by tainted grain alcohol. His report describes victims found in a circle around the church, their bodies contorted in identical positions, arms raised skyward, mouths agape, strange burn marks on their throats. What Dr. Moreau's official report omitted, but his personal correspondence revealed, was far more disturbing. In a letter to his colleague in Baton Rouge, he wrote, "The positions were too precise, too ritualistic. Each body bore the same marks, 2 puncture wounds on the neck, though no snake could have bitten 19 people in identical locations. Most unsettling were the survivors' reactions. They showed no grief, only what I can describe as disappointment. One woman told me, 'They were chosen but found unworthy. I left that accursed place as quickly as possible.'" The pattern repeated in 1923. 14 members of the parish's youth congregation, aged 16 to 20, were discovered dead in the swamp after what survivors called a spiritual retreat. The official cause: asphyxiation due to swamp gas accumulation in a low-lying area. Yet the investigators' photographs, archived in the Louisiana State Police files, show the bodies arranged in a deliberate pattern, a serpentine curve stretching 30 feet through the marsh. Each victim's clothing bore traces of an unknown crystalline substance that glowed faintly green under certain lights. Detective Marcus Hayes noted in his case file, "The surviving congregation members claim the youths were attempting ascension, but failed due to impure bloodlines. When pressed for explanation, they fell silent." The community's birth records show these 14 were all newcomers to the parish, married in from outside families within the last generation. Make of that what you will. The most devastating incident occurred in 1967, as the summer of love bloomed across America. 43 members of Coluver Parish, including 12 children, were found dead after ingesting what authorities labeled contaminated communion wine. The federal investigation, launched due to similarities to the Jonestown tragedy that would occur a decade later, concluded it was a mass suicide inspired by apocalyptic beliefs. But FBI agent Dorothy Chen's classified report, declassified in 2017, tells a different story. The toxicology results defy explanation. The substance in their systems matches no known poison. More troubling, the community's own records, seized during investigation, speak of the Great Feeding and preparing vessels for the Scaled Father's return. 38 of the 43 victims belonged to bloodlines traceable to the original 1794 founders. The 5 who didn't were recent converts. Only those 5 showed signs of struggle. What connects these tragedies isn't just their occurrence but their timing. Each happened during significant astronomical events: the 1876 deaths during a total lunar eclipse, the 1923 incident during a rare planetary alignment, the 1967 tragedy during the new moon closest to the summer solstice. Each left survivors who displayed not trauma but religious ecstasy. Each was officially explained away as accident, madness, or misfortune. Most revealing is what the parish records don't show. Despite these mass casualties, certain family names, Serpentine, Thibodeau, Beauregard, Coluver, continue appearing in birth records without interruption. Either these bloodlines possessed extraordinary luck in avoiding every tragedy, or the deaths were more selective than random disasters would suggest. The pattern, buried in bureaucratic files and faded ink, suggests something far more deliberate than misfortune, a generational culling that spared only those deemed worthy by standards we can only guess at. Dr. Marion Thibodeau came to Louisiana State University in 1993 with impeccable credentials and an unfortunate surname. The Yale-educated genealogist specialized in Creole family histories, drawn by both professional interest and personal curiosity about her own heritage. "I want to trace how Louisiana's unique cultural blend created distinct family patterns," she wrote in her grant proposal. She had no idea her research would trace her own bloodline to Coluver Parish, or that this discovery would cost her life. Initially, Dr. Thibodeau approached the Coluver Parish records with academic enthusiasm. The community's meticulous record-keeping seemed a genealogist's dream. But as she digitized and cross-referenced centuries of births, marriages, and deaths, impossible patterns emerged. In a letter to her research partner dated March 1995, she wrote, "I'm finding the same names recurring with mathematical precision. Josiah Serpentine, born 1798, 1847, 1896, 1945. Isabel Beauregard, born 1803, 1852, 1901, 1950. Always 49-year intervals. Always dying young enough to avoid overlapping with their descendants." Her excitement transformed to unease as she dug deeper. The Coluver Parish records showed bloodlines that seemed to reset every half-century, with names, birthmarks, and even signatures remaining eerily consistent across generations. Her research notes, recovered from her waterlogged laptop, reveal growing alarm. This isn't genealogy. It's something else. The birth certificates from 1990s show identical footprints to those from 1890s. Not similar. Identical. How is this possible? Dr. Thibodeau's final weeks were marked by increasingly frantic research. Campus security footage shows her working until dawn in the archives, surrounding herself with charts that mapped impossible family trees. She began receiving unmarked packages containing old photographs, images of Coluver Parish residents from different eras who bore uncanny resemblances to each other. One photo particularly disturbed her. A 1920s portrait of Marie Thibodeau, age 30, who looked exactly like Marianne herself. On April 15, 1995, she sent an urgent email to the FBI's New Orleans office. "I've discovered evidence of massive identity fraud spanning 200 years in Coluver Parish. The implications are staggering. Please contact me immediately." The email was never answered. 3 days later, she scheduled a meeting with a documentary filmmaker, promising evidence that will rewrite Louisiana history. She never made that meeting. On April 19, 1995, Dr. Marianne Thibodeau's body was pulled from False River, 60 miles from her Baton Rouge home. The coroner ruled it accidental drowning, noting she had apparently fallen from her boat while conducting unauthorized research. No boat was ever found. Her car was discovered at LSU, her office ransacked, her research files missing. But Dr. Thibodeau had been cautious. She'd uploaded encrypted copies of her findings to multiple servers, accessible only through a complex series of passwords she'd shared with her estranged sister in Seattle. These files, recovered in 2018, form the backbone of our investigation. They contain digitized records, genealogical charts that shouldn't exist, and her final, chilling conclusion: they're not descendants. They're the same people returning again and again. Coluver Parish isn't a community. It's a centuries-old masquerade. And they know I know. The last entry in her research journal, dated April 18, 1995, consists of a single line. "The serpent swallows its tail. The cycle continues, unless someone stops it." For 2 centuries, Coluver Parish existed in a bubble of legal immunity that defies explanation. Sheriff's deputies who patrolled every corner of Louisiana's backwaters somehow never ventured into certain parts of the swamp. State police investigations that pursued leads to the parish's borders invariably stopped, citing jurisdictional issues that no one could adequately define. The pattern of avoidance was so consistent it suggested not negligence but policy. Retired Sheriff Claude Melanchon, speaking in 2010 from his nursing home in Lafayette, finally broke the silence that had protected Coluver Parish for generations. "My first day on the job in 1962, the old sheriff took me aside," Melanchon recalled, his hand still trembling at the memory. "He showed me a map with certain areas marked in red. 'You don't go there,' he said. 'Not for missing persons, not for murder, not if Jesus Christ himself calls for help. Those swamp folk handle their own business.' When I asked why, he just said, 'Because the ones who go there don't come back the same. If they come back at all.'" The official stance remained frustratingly consistent. When concerned citizens reported suspicious activities, authorities responded with variations of the same dismissive phrases: religious freedom, Cultural differences. Swamp folk have their own ways. A 1973 petition signed by 200 residents of neighboring parishes, demanding investigation into screams heard on new moon nights and missing persons whose cars are found at the parish border, received a formal response from the state attorney general. Without concrete evidence of criminal activity, we cannot violate the constitutional rights of a recognized religious community. But it was the aborted FBI investigation of 1978 that revealed how deep the protection ran. Following the disappearance of 3 federal wildlife officers who had entered Coluver Parish to investigate poaching complaints, the FBI launched Operation Cottonmouth. Agents Sarah Chun and Michael Roberts spent 6 weeks building a case, documenting everything from tax irregularities to potential kidnapping charges. Their preliminary report, leaked years later, painted a damning picture. The community operates as a closed system with its own laws, its own justice, and apparent immunity from outside interference. Local law enforcement actively obstructs investigation. State officials redirect inquiries. Someone with significant influence is protecting these people. The agents requested authorization for a full raid, citing evidence of ritualistic practices involving minors and possible human trafficking spanning generations. The response came not from FBI headquarters, but from the Department of Justice itself. Operation Cottonmouth was terminated immediately. Agents Chun and Roberts were reassigned to opposite coasts. The official file was sealed, marked with classification levels typically reserved for national security matters. When Chun tried to discuss the case at her retirement in 2005, she received a cease and desist order within hours. Deputy U.S. Marshal James Broussard, who participated in the aborted operation, kept silent for decades before finally speaking out in 2019. We were 2 days from moving in when the order came down, not just to stand down but to destroy all evidence, forget what we'd seen. They said it was above our pay grade. I asked my supervisor who could possibly protect a backwater cult. He said, the kind of people who've been protecting them since before Louisiana was a state. The wall of official silence around Coluver Parish stood unbroken for over 200 years, a testament to influence that reached from swamp shacks to marble halls of power. Every badge-wearing officer who might have made a difference learned the same lesson. Some places exist outside the law, not because they're forgotten, but because someone very powerful wants them left alone. The digital age should have made it impossible for a centuries-old cult to operate in shadow. Satellite imagery, cell phone tracking, and internet surveillance have exposed countless secrets worldwide. Yet somehow, Coluver Parish adapted to the 21st century with disturbing efficiency, transforming from an isolated backwater community into a technologically sophisticated network that used modern tools to hide ancient practices. The transformation began in 1997, 2 years after Dr. Marion Thibodeau's death. Overnight, Coluver Parish went digital. High-speed internet cables were laid through the swamp at extraordinary expense. Every household received state-of-the-art computers. The community launched websites for their Church of Eternal Transformation, presenting a benign face of New Age spirituality mixed with traditional Christianity. Behind encrypted firewalls, however, darker communications flourished. NSA whistleblower Marcus Webb, speaking under condition of anonymity in 2019, revealed what government surveillance had uncovered. We started intercepting their communications in 2001. What we found was a dual-layer system. Public-facing websites preaching harmony and inner peace, while encrypted channels discussed feeding schedules, bloodline purity, and something called the Tricentennial Awakening. Every attempt to crack their encryption failed. They were using algorithms that shouldn't have existed outside of military applications. The cult's evolution became most apparent in their recruitment methods. Gone were the days of isolating victims in the swamp. Instead, they identified targets through social media, seeking individuals with specific genetic markers they somehow tracked through ancestry websites and medical databases. Dr. Patricia Huang, a data analyst who consulted for the FBI, discovered the pattern. They were hunting for descendants of their original bloodlines who had left the parish. They called it reclaiming the scattered seeds. Between 2000 and 2018, over 300 people with genealogical connections to Coluver Parish vanished after being contacted online. But it was the correlation between disappearances and astronomical events that proved most chilling. Using advanced software to predict celestial alignments, the cult timed their activities with mathematical precision. Missing persons reports spiked during every new moon, reached crescendos during eclipses, and showed disturbing patterns around rare planetary conjunctions. A leaked Homeland Security report from 2015 noted, Coluver Parish activities demonstrate knowledge of astronomical cycles that surpasses many academic institutions. They're not following a lunar calendar. They're following something far more complex. The intercepted communications grew increasingly urgent as 2019 approached. References to the 300th year appeared with growing frequency. Encrypted messages spoke of preparing the final generation and gathering the pure blood for the ultimate transformation. One partially decoded message from 2018 sent chills through intelligence agencies. When the serpent constellation aligns with the bloodletting moon in our tricentennial year, the scaled father shall wake. 299 years of feeding will bear fruit. The eternal cycle completes. Financial records showed massive movements of resources. The cult liquidated properties, transferred millions through cryptocurrency, and purchased supplies that made no sense for a religious community. Industrial refrigeration units, medical equipment typically used for blood storage, and enough ritual-grade salt to preserve hundreds of bodies. Satellite imagery revealed new construction in the swamp, structures that appeared overnight and seemed to extend deep underground. By late 2018, intelligence agencies faced a terrifying reality. A cult that had operated for 3 centuries was preparing for something unprecedented. Their technological sophistication made traditional surveillance nearly impossible. Their influence reached into government agencies that should have stopped them. And according to their own communications, whatever they planned would happen during the new moon of October 2019, the exact tricentennial of Coluver Parish's founding. Agent Sarah Mitchell, leading the Reformed Task Force, summarized the situation in a classified briefing. We're not dealing with backwards swamp dwellers anymore. They've evolved, adapted, and they're planning something that makes their previous activities look like rehearsals. We have less than a year to stop a ritual 300 years in the making. Hurricane Florence was supposed to miss Louisiana entirely. Meteorologists couldn't explain why it suddenly veered west in September 2018, striking the coast with unexpected fury. But it was what Florence unearthed in her wake that defied all explanation. As floodwaters receded from Coluver Parish, they revealed what 2 centuries of careful concealment had hidden. A massive sinkhole where the original church once stood, exposing an architectural impossibility beneath. First responders arriving for routine post-storm assessment found themselves staring into an abyss. The limestone church foundation had collapsed inward, revealing carved stone steps descending into darkness. Initial reports described a strong smell of copper and incense emanating from the opening. Louisiana State Police Sergeant Rita Domingue, first on scene, later testified, "My flashlight beam just kept going down. The steps were worn smooth by centuries of use. I counted 60 steps before I called for backup. No church basement should go that deep." The forensic archaeology team's preliminary report, filed September 23, 2018, maintains clinical detachment that barely masks the horror of their discoveries. The underground structure extends approximately 200 feet below surface level, carved directly into bedrock that geological surveys indicate shouldn't exist in this region. The main chamber measures 100 feet in diameter with a domed ceiling covered in serpentine motifs that predate any known Native American or European artistic traditions in Louisiana. But it was the chamber's contents that transformed archaeological curiosity into criminal investigation. The report continues, central altar constructed from single block of unidentified black stone, weighing approximately 12 tons. Surface covered in channels designed to direct liquid flow into collection reservoirs. Spectroscopic analysis indicates presence of human hemoglobin in concentrations suggesting extended use. Surrounding walls contain 49 alcoves, each holding mummified human remains in various states of preservation, earliest dating to approximately 1794. Dr. Elizabeth Crenshaw, the lead archaeologist, broke protocol by keeping a personal journal alongside her official reports. Her entries reveal what the sterile language concealed. The bodies in the alcoves aren't displayed like trophies. They're arranged like a congregation, all facing the central altar. Some show signs of self-mummification while still alive. The newest additions can't be more than a year old. The children, God help us, some of the alcoves contain children. Their faces peaceful as if they simply fell asleep. The technological analysis proved even more disturbing. Hidden within ancient stone were modern additions: fiber optic cables, electronic sensors, climate control systems that had maintained perfect preservation conditions. Someone had been maintaining and upgrading this chamber continuously. The engineering report noted, integration of 21st century technology with 18th century construction suggests ongoing use and improvement over centuries. Whoever built this never stopped using it. Most inexplicable was the chamber's very existence. Core samples showed the limestone had been carved using techniques unknown to modern engineering. The precision of the serpentine carvings, when analyzed by computer, revealed mathematical patterns that encoded astronomical data with accuracy that shouldn't have been possible in 1794. One analyst noted, "It's as if they had access to knowledge we've only gained through space telescopes and computer modeling." The FBI immediately sealed the site, but not before drone footage leaked showing agents removing dozens of evidence containers. Hazmat teams worked around the clock, cataloging artifacts that included ritual implements, preserved organic materials, and texts written in a cipher that combined multiple dead languages. One partially translated fragment read, "Here sleeps the scaled father, fed by generations, awaiting the star's permission to wake." The discovery should have led to immediate arrests, but when task force members arrived at the parish proper, they found only empty houses, meals still warm on tables, computers wiped clean but still humming. 300 people had vanished overnight, leaving behind only their underground temple, a monument to centuries of horror and a promise that their work was far from finished. At 3:47 a.m. on October 2, 2019, Operation Copperhead launched with the precision of a military invasion. 200 federal agents, supported by state police and National Guard units, converged on Coluver Parish from 6 directions. Helicopters with thermal imaging hovered overhead. Coast Guard vessels blocked water routes. Electronic warfare units jammed all communications. After months of planning following the temple discovery, authorities were certain they had the cult trapped. Task Force Commander Patricia Hayes briefed her teams with confidence born from meticulous preparation. Surveillance confirms 312 individuals currently in the parish. We've identified leadership, mapped every building, and blocked every exit. No one leaves without passing through our checkpoints. Agents carried arrest warrants for 47 cult leaders on charges ranging from murder to tax evasion. The operation was designed to be swift, overwhelming, and inescapable. The first sign something was wrong came from the aerial units. "Thermal signatures are strange," reported helicopter pilot Captain Marcus Webb. "I'm reading heat sources, but they're not moving. Not at all." Ground teams breached the perimeter at 4 a.m. exactly, expecting resistance or at least panic. Instead, they found silence. Not the tense quiet of people hiding, but the absolute stillness of abandonment. House by house, the horrifying reality emerged. The cult had vanished, leaving behind mannequins wrapped in electric blankets to fool thermal imaging. In the community center, 312 heat sources turned out to be camping stoves arranged beneath thermal blankets, programmed to simulate human body temperatures. Agent Rivera, clearing the main church, radioed, "They're gone, all of them, but the coffee's still hot. There's food on the stove still cooking. It's like they vanished mid-meal." The evidence of hasty evacuation was everywhere, yet somehow also nowhere. Closets stood full of clothes. Cars remained in driveways with keys in ignitions. Personal effects, photographs, jewelry, children's toys, lay undisturbed. But every computer was wiped, every document shredded, every trace of where 312 people might have gone professionally erased. The only message left behind was painted on the church wall in what forensics would confirm was human blood. "The serpent sheds its skin. Investigation revealed the impossible scope of the vanishing. Satellite footage from the night before showed normal activity until 11:47 p.m., when simultaneously, every light in the parish went dark for exactly 13 minutes. When they came back on, thermal imaging showed the decoy heat signatures already in place. In 13 minutes, 312 people, including elderly individuals and infant children, had simply disappeared. Someone warned them, Commander Hayes stated in her after-action report. Someone with access to our operational plans, our timing, our methods. They didn't just run. They executed a rehearsed evacuation plan that must have been practiced for years. The investigation into the leak would eventually reach the highest levels of law enforcement, finding evidence of cult sympathizers or members in positions throughout government agencies. But it was drone footage from the aftermath that proved most chilling. As crime scene photographers documented the empty parish, their drones captured something that satellite imagery had missed. Carved into the swamp itself, visible only from specific altitudes, was an enormous serpent symbol created by carefully planted vegetation. The tail pointed northwest toward Texas. The head aimed southeast toward the Gulf. And at 7 points along its body, GPS coordinates had been burned into the marsh. Cryptographers worked feverishly to decode the message. The coordinates led to 7 locations across the South. Abandoned churches, old plantations, forgotten cemeteries. Each site showed signs of recent activity. Fresh excavations, new construction hidden beneath camouflage netting, and thermal signatures that disappeared the moment authorities approached. The cult hadn't just escaped. They had scattered to predetermined locations, ready to continue their work. The final insult came 3 days later. Every agent involved in Operation Copperhead received an identical package. Inside, a shed snakeskin and a note in archaic script. Translated, it read, "The tricentennial approaches. The scaled father hungers. You guard empty nests while we prepare the feast. 297 years of patience will not be undone by your fumbling. See you at the bloodletting moon." Commander Hayes' final assessment was bleak. "We didn't catch them because they were never truly there. Coluver Parish was just one den. They've been spreading for centuries, and now they're activated. We're not hunting a cult anymore. We're hunting a network that's had 300 years to prepare for exactly this moment." The exodus from Coluver Parish triggered a contagion of darkness across the American South. Within weeks of Operation Copperhead's failure, investigators tracked cult members to 17 states, watching helplessly as they melted into unsuspecting communities like poison dissolving in water. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit noted a chilling pattern. They don't hide. They integrate. They become your neighbors, your coworkers, your children's teachers. And then the changes begin. Houma, Louisiana, was first to report anomalies. 3 weeks after new families arrived from up north, pets began vanishing. Not just strays. Beloved family dogs disappeared from locked yards. Indoor cats vanished from homes with no sign of forced entry. Local veterinarian Dr. James Melanchon documented 17 missing animals in October alone. The strange thing, he noted, was how the other animals reacted. Dogs would whimper and hide when these new folks walked by. Cats would arch their backs and hiss at empty air after they'd passed. By November, the pattern spread across the Gulf Coast. Mobile, Alabama, Pensacola, Florida, Houston, Texas, always the same progression. New arrivals who seemed perfectly normal, followed by missing pets, then strange sounds in the night, rhythmic chanting in no recognizable language, drums that echoed from no discernible source. Security cameras captured nothing. Motion sensors failed to trigger. Technology itself seemed to bend around these new residents, protecting their secrets. The missing persons reports began in December. Jennifer Walsh, 19, University of Alabama student with traces of French Creole ancestry. Marcus Thibodeau, 34, Houston oil worker who'd never known his Louisiana grandfather. Sarah Beauregard, 8, whose adoptive parents in Pensacola never knew her birth name connected her to Coluver Parish. Each vanished during the new moon. Each left behind only a peculiar smell, copper and incense, and parents or roommates who couldn't quite remember when they'd last seen them. For the Operation Copperhead Task Force, the diaspora brought personal terror. Agent Rivera found the first package on her doorstep November 1st. A perfectly shed snakeskin wrapped around a photo of her daughter at school. Agent Thompson received his at the office, somehow delivered past federal security. A snakeskin and his son's little league schedule. Every member of the raid team was targeted, the message clear. We know where you live, where your children play, where you're vulnerable. The psychological warfare escalated. Task force members reported identical nightmares. Visions of enormous serpents swallowing their loved ones whole. Some heard whispers in Creole French outside their windows. Others found serpentine symbols drawn in dust on their cars each morning. Agent Patricia Hayes, the operation commander, lasted until December before requesting reassignment. They're not just threatening us, she explained to her superiors. They're demonstrating our complete inability to protect anyone, including ourselves. Dr. Sarah Winters, FBI psychiatrist assigned to counsel the task force, documented the toll. These agents are experiencing a form of psychological torture. The cult isn't just evading capture. They're proving they can reach anyone, anywhere. The shed snakeskins are particularly effective, symbolizing both transformation and threat. Each package reminds the agents that while they caught empty shells in Coluver Parish, the serpents themselves have grown new skins and spread everywhere. By January 2020, the FBI faced a horrifying reality. The cult hadn't been contained to one parish. It had been incubating there, preparing to spread. Conservative estimates suggested at least 300 active members across the South, with potentially thousands of sympathizers in positions of authority. Worse, the missing persons cases showed they were actively hunting bloodline descendants, gathering specific genetic lineages for purposes that 3 centuries of documentation still couldn't fully explain. The diaspora's message was clear. Coluver Parish had been just one scale on a much larger serpent. Now that serpent was in motion and no one, not federal agents, not their families, not anyone with the wrong ancestry, was safe from its coils. The true horror of the serpent's bloodline lies not in what they did, but in how many people and institutions allowed them to do it. For 3 centuries, a network of complicity stretched from Louisiana's swamps to state capitals, from local sheriff's offices to federal agencies. Each generation of authorities faced the same choice: confront the unthinkable or look away, and each generation chose blindness. The pattern began with Louisiana's founding families. Archived letters between territorial governors reveal that Coluver Parish's immunity was built into the state's very foundation. Governor William Claiborne wrote in 1812, "Certain accommodations have been made with the established communities. Their ways, however peculiar, ensure stability in the territories. We need their cooperation more than we need their conformity." This devil's bargain, autonomy in exchange for political support, created a precedent that would poison Louisiana law enforcement for centuries. Financial forensics revealed the cult's true power. By 1900, shell companies linked to Coluver Parish controlled significant stakes in Louisiana's banking, shipping, and agricultural industries. They didn't just hide in the swamp. They owned the companies that employed the police chiefs, funded the political campaigns, and built the courthouses. Deputy Attorney General Michael Chun, investigating financial crimes in 2019, discovered a web of influence that stunned him. Every time we traced money laundering or bribery back to its source, we hit the same wall. Companies registered to post office boxes, lawyers who'd been dead for decades, and judges who suddenly forgot how to issue warrants. The cult weaponized American values against themselves. Religious freedom became a shield for ritual murder. Privacy rights protected underground temples. Property laws kept investigators off lands where horrors unfolded nightly. Civil liberties attorney David Winters, who later recanted his position, spent years defending the cult's rights before realizing the truth. They didn't need to corrupt the system. They just needed to understand it better than anyone else. Every protection we built into law to prevent tyranny, they twisted into armor for their atrocities. Fear completed what money and law couldn't achieve. Whistleblowers died in statistically impossible accidents. Investigators' families received untraceable threats. Entire careers ended overnight when officials pushed too hard. Sheriff Patricia Broussard, who attempted to investigate Culver Parish in 1987, saw her daughter nearly drown in a shallow pond, her husband's business mysteriously fail, and her own health deteriorate from an unidentifiable illness. She dropped the investigation and lived. Many others weren't so fortunate. The digital age only strengthened their position. Tech workers reported impossible code in government databases that seemed to flag and redirect any searches related to Culver Parish. Surveillance systems developed blind spots that corresponded precisely to cult properties. Artificial intelligence programs trained to identify criminal patterns somehow never noticed the correlation between missing persons and lunar cycles in certain Louisiana parishes. As one anonymous NSA analyst noted, "It's not that our systems can't see them. It's that someone taught our systems not to look." Perhaps most damning was the role of academia. Universities that received generous donations from cultural preservation societies discouraged research into certain historical periods. Archaeologists who stumbled upon pre-Columbian serpent artifacts in Louisiana found their funding cut and their findings discredited. Anthropologist Dr. Maria Santos, who documented connections between Culver Parish and ancient Mesoamerican serpent cults, was dismissed from 3 universities before abandoning her research. "The message was clear," she recalled. "Some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue." The result was a perfect storm of institutional failure. Law enforcement couldn't act without evidence. Researchers couldn't provide evidence without access. Politicians couldn't grant access without risking their careers. And beneath it all, a cult that understood one fundamental truth. Systems designed by humans can be corrupted by humans, especially when those humans have centuries to perfect their methods. By 2020, reformers faced a bitter reality. The very structures meant to protect society had been transformed into a cage that protected predators instead. The unbroken chain of complicity stretched back so far, involved so many, that breaking it would require dismantling and rebuilding institutions that had been compromised from their very foundations. The serpent's bloodline wants you to believe in inevitability, that their 300-year chain cannot be broken, that ancient pacts supersede modern law, that some evils are too deeply rooted to extract. They are wrong. While the specific cult depicted in this documentary is fictional, the patterns of manipulation, institutional corruption, and community exploitation it illustrates are devastatingly real. Every day, actual cults use similar tactics to trap, abuse, and destroy lives. But every day, survivors break free, communities resist, and justice, however delayed, finds its way. If this documentary disturbed you, it should. Not because serpent cults lurk in every swamp, but because the mechanisms that allowed our fictional cult to flourish, isolation, institutional blindness, financial corruption, and fear, exist in every community. Real cults thrive in the spaces where society fails to look, protected by the very freedoms they pervert. Recognizing these patterns is the first step in breaking them.